silly putty is fun for most everyone.
Hey! Did you see these new...
Get amongst its slap bracelets!
The chemistry of plastics. You make plastic.
Do you remember those outrageous 1980s things we all loved, only to find out they're banned now? From wild toys to jaw-dropping ads, these hilarious bits of everyday life once felt totally normal. So when did the fun stuff suddenly become off-limits? And what does that say about us? You might be thinking, how could candy be banned? But the 1980s truly had no breaks. Candy cigarettes were already controversial enough, but then someone had the bright idea to make them glow in the dark. Yep, sugar sticks that mimicked smoking and lit up like a rave at midnight. There was something bizarrely fascinating about watching a bunch of kids huddled in a corner blowing imaginary smoke rings with glowing sugar between their fingers. They were sold in shiny foil packs that looked exactly like real cigarettes and came in flavors like Cool Mint and Bubblegum Menthol. The glow was supposed to be fun, but what it really did was make kids feel like smoking was some kind of neon superhero activity. Unsurprisingly, health organizations and parents alike threw the biggest tantrum of the decade when they realized these things were being handed out at birthday parties and stuffed into school lunchboxes. These neon nibbles became outlawed in multiple countries, and not just because of the smoking imitation. Turns out the glow came from questionable phosphorescent materials that were never meant to be ingested. Yeah, just let that sink in. If you were one of the kids who proudly chewed on a glowing cigarette under the covers at night, congratulations, you survived one of the strangest sugar highs in history. Childhood rebellion never looked so radioactive. If the 1980s had a face for cool, it was Joe Camel. Slick sunglasses, leather jacket, and more swagger than a rock band on tour, all wrapped up in cartoon camel form. Joe was the animated bad boy of cigarette advertising, plastered across billboards, posters, and vending machines. You'd walk past a convenience store and bam, there he was, staring you down with a cigarette hanging from his mouth like he just walked off a Miami Vice set. And that was the problem. Joe Camel was so smooth, so fun, so cool, that kids actually started to believe cigarettes were the ticket to growing up fast. Studies even showed that children recognized Joe Camel more than Mickey Mouse. That is not a joke. It got to the point where people realized this cartoon camel was less about adult advertising and more about grooming the next generation of smokers. Health groups sued. Legislators freaked out. Cartoon characters got canceled. By the mid-1990s, Joe Camel was finally retired, and his face was pulled from everything. These days, trying to advertise cigarettes with a cartoon would get you run out of town faster than a boy band reunion at a biker bar. But Joe's legacy still lingers, a weird, smiling reminder of how far advertisers would go in the 1980s to make cigarettes look like bubblegum. Honestly, who thought the way to promote lung cancer was a talking camel in Ray-Bans? Now here's a throwback that sounds innocent but aged like milk. Cap guns. Toys that looked like full-on revolvers, complete with spark-producing ammunition and realistic gunfire sound. And here's the kicker. In the 1980s, they came with 0 orange tips. They looked real. They sounded real. And if you squinted just a little, you'd think Dirty Harry was stomping through your cul-de-sac on a sugar high. These things were the highlight of every 5-year-old's Christmas list. You'd be running down the street in cowboy boots, brandishing what looked like an actual firearm, and everyone would just smile and wave. But as you might guess, the fun came to a screeching halt once people realized that carrying a fake gun that looked exactly like a real one was, well, dangerous. There were countless stories of kids getting stopped by police, scaring neighbors, and in some tragic cases, much worse. The cap gun craze spiraled out of control, and lawmakers were forced to jump in and mandate that bright orange tips be placed on the muzzle of every toy gun sold. To think, we went from the Wild West of the 1980s playgrounds to the high-visibility plastic safety standards of today. No kid should have to be told to drop the weapon when all they're doing is pretending to be a sheriff. Still, if you find one of these old models in your grandparents' attic, maybe just leave it there. If you were alive in the 1980s and did not own a slap bracelet, did you even go to school? These brightly colored fashion statements were the ultimate flex in every classroom. One second, you had a straight strip of what looked like a ruler wrapped in neon plastic. The next, it would coil onto your wrist with a satisfying snap that echoed like thunder across the hallway. It was like magic. But here's where things took a turn. The inside of those slap bracelets was a thin strip of exposed metal. Not protected, not softened, just raw, coiled danger. After enough slaps, and let's be real, kids were not gentle with these things, the fabric would wear out, and the metal would peek through like a horror movie reveal. Suddenly, this fashion trend started drawing blood. Kids were getting sliced, scratched, and occasionally needing stitches. Schools banned them faster than you could say Lisa Frank, and manufacturers were forced to rethink their designs. Today's versions are much safer, padded and sealed tight, but the original slap bracelets of the 1980s remain legendary for being one bad wrist flick away from a trip to the nurse's office. Still, there was nothing like that snap. Pure adrenaline, the bracelet equivalent of a mic drop, just with more tetanus risk. Ah yes, the commercial that accidentally turned the king of pop into the king of hair-related lawsuits. In 1984, Pepsi decided to film one of its most high-profile ads ever. The scene? Michael Jackson performing with his brothers on stage, fireworks going off like the 4th of July. What could go wrong? Everything. During one explosive take, the pyrotechnics went off too early, right over Michael's head, and his hair caught fire in front of a live audience and dozens of cameras. For several seconds, no one noticed. He kept dancing. That is dedication. But by the time crew members rushed to him, he had already suffered second and third degree burns to his scalp. The footage was buried for years, but when it resurfaced, it sparked outrage. Fans were furious. Pepsi scrambled. The incident became a defining moment in both advertising and celebrity safety protocols. Michael received a massive settlement, which he donated to the hospital where he was treated. Meanwhile, every company in America suddenly took a long, hard look at their special effects. As you can imagine, the commercial was banned from ever airing again. But the story lived on, a wild reminder that the 1980s did not believe in rehearsal safety. If there was a lesson learned here, it's this. Maybe do not set your global superstar on fire to sell soda. Okay, maybe they were not literally coked up, but have you seen those cereal mascots from the 1980s? They were operating on a different frequency. Toucan Sam, the Trix Rabbit, Sugar Bear, they all looked like they had just chugged 12 espresso shots and a glitter milkshake. The animation style? Chaotic. The pacing? Blistering. The message? Eat sugar, and your life becomes a technicolor fantasy filled with unicorns, jungle adventures, and infinite joy. These commercials aired during Saturday morning cartoons and were designed to bypass your brain and go straight to your pancreas. Kids were basically hypnotized. It was candy for breakfast, lunch, and maybe dinner too if you had cool enough parents. But the real kicker was how aggressively these ads targeted kids, with zero nutritional disclaimers and maxed out sugar appeal. Eventually, studies started showing the obvious. Children who consumed these cereals daily were bouncing off the walls and crashing like meteorites. The government and watchdog groups stepped in, banning a bunch of these ads or forcing them to tone down the hyperactivity. Gone were the days of wild-eyed mascots screaming about marshmallows and glitter. Now they just quietly suggest a part of this balanced breakfast. And let's be real, no one has ever paired sugary cereal with kale and expected a miracle. This one sounds like satire, but trust me, it happened. Picture this: a colorful puppet on a children's show, complete with googly eyes and a fuzzy nose, casually lighting up a cigarette. Welcome to the 1980s, where kids' programming was a fever dream with no adult supervision. Some of the puppet characters were meant to be cool or rebellious, so naturally they smoked. One particularly infamous show even had a puppet who blew smoke rings while giving out advice. You were supposed to learn math while watching a sock puppet exhale like a jazz club regular. What kind of twisted logic was that? Parents initially thought it was quirky or just part of the character. But soon enough, health experts stepped in and were like, Hey, maybe do not let Elmo's weird cousin chain smoke on air? The backlash came fast and hard. Within a few years, any puppet caught with a cigarette on television was pulled from programming entirely. And it is wild to think that we needed to be told this was a bad idea. Looking back now, it feels like the writers just lost a bet. Still, there is a generation of adults who remember learning how to spell and inhale from the same fuzzy character, therapy not included. This was not a prank. In the 1980s, it was disturbingly common for Halloween stores to sell clown costumes that came with, wait for it, real chainsaws. As in, functional, gas-powered chainsaws that could rev and roar. All you had to do was fill them up and hit the ignition. You think Halloween is scary now? Try being 8 years old and getting chased through a yard by your neighbor's teenage brother dressed like Pennywise with a real chainsaw. The noise alone was enough to give you gray hairs before puberty. Parents either had no idea or thought it was part of the fun until incidents started piling up. Kids would accidentally start the saws, people got minor injuries, and one poor guy ended up mowing over his own candy bucket. It got so bad that cities started banning the sale of real chainsaws as Halloween props entirely. Eventually, laws were passed restricting the sale of gas-powered items in costume kits. Now, the closest you will get is a foam prop with a loop sound effect. Probably for the best. But if you lived through those Halloweens, you remember how real the fear felt. It was not just the costume that made your heart race. It was the roar of a tool that should never be paired with face paint and candy corn. We need to talk about one of the most dangerous toys ever sold on a store shelf. Picture this, a plastic revolver that fired little darts, except these darts had actual needles embedded in them. Welcome to 1980s toy design, where fun and potential blindness went hand in hand. These needle darts were meant to stick into foam boards or cork walls, but you know how it went. Within 10 minutes, someone was aiming for their friend's forehead like it was an Olympic event. It was like dodgeball, but with projectiles capable of breaking skin. Hospitals saw a weird spike in dart-related injuries, and doctors started sounding the alarm. Once kids started showing up with puncture wounds and bruises shaped like bullseyes, the government finally stepped in. These toys were swiftly banned from production, and any leftovers were pulled from shelves. It is baffling how something this dangerous was ever approved in the first place. You look at old commercials and they are hyping this thing up like it is the next big Nerf revolution. Just ignore the blood. Today's toy darts are made of soft foam and shoot with the force of a polite sneeze. Back then, it was backyard warfare. Thank your eyelids for making it through the decade intact. Believe it or not, some of the most inappropriate board games ever created were being marketed during family game night in the 1980s. Titles like Drug Dealer and Cocaine King were sold at novelty shops and occasionally in regular toy aisles. The gameplay? You guessed it. Players competed to build empires based on illegal narcotics, smuggling routes, and taking out rivals. Yes, that was the entertainment choice for your average Thursday evening. The pieces were tiny plastic guns, dollar bills, and powdery white dice that looked suspiciously themed. These games were meant to be edgy and adult, but of course they made their way into the hands of kids because the 1980s had no chill. It did not take long for word to spread and watchdog groups to freak out. School boards, local governments, and even police departments called for immediate bans, citing that the games glamorized the drug trade at a time when the war on drugs was all over the news. Today, these board games are collector's items, mainly because they are so outrageous that no one can believe they were real. But they were. And they sat on shelves right next to Monopoly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Imagine learning about capitalism and cocaine on the same game night. Only in the 1980s. If you were roaming a shopping mall in the 1980s and wanted to look like you just got kicked out of a punk concert, the fashion kiosks had you covered. Razorblade earrings, yes, actual metal blades, were all the rage. People wore them in pairs, dangling next to their necks like industrial warning signs. But wait, it gets better. Next to them on the racks were spiked bracelets, chokers, jackets with sharp studs, and occasionally an actual chain that could double as a medieval weapon. And the best part? These were marketed to teenagers. You could walk into a store at 13 years old and walk out looking like you just escaped a biker gang initiation. Parents were either terrified or pretending not to notice. Schools, on the other hand, were in full-blown panic mode. It did not take long before kids were getting scratched, cut, or using their jewelry in impromptu hallway sword fights. Some even discovered that the earrings could actually slice through paper. Eventually, schools and local governments cracked down. Malls were pressured to stop selling anything that could double as a weapon. Razorblade earrings were banned from most chains, and spiked accessories got rebranded as costume only. Today, those styles still exist, but you need to jump through a few more hoops to get your hands on anything that could poke an eye out. But if you ever wore them unironically, congratulations. You survived mall goth mode on hard difficulty. Imagine this. You are 10 years old, clutching a sweaty roll of quarters, and the only thing between you and Pac-Man glory is a wall of cigarette smoke. Welcome to the 1980s arcade experience. Back then, smoking areas were everywhere, even in places designed for kids. In many arcades, there was no separation between the grown-ups puffing away and the children playing Donkey Kong. Sometimes the ashtrays were built into the arcade cabinets. Picture a game where one hand moved the joystick and the other held a cigarette, all while your 6-year-old brother waited for his turn. And it was not just tolerated. It was the vibe. Neon lights, synth music, and the haze of secondhand smoke. At the time, nobody really questioned it. The idea of indoor smoking was so normal that even Chuck E. Cheese had smoking zones. But once studies started linking secondhand smoke to major health risks, and kids started coughing up their tokens, things changed fast. Laws were passed, smoking was banned from arcades, and the haze finally cleared. Now, the idea of letting your child inhale a Marlboro cloud while playing Frogger feels absolutely bonkers. But if you lived it, you remember the strange charm, the smell of burning tobacco mixed with nacho cheese and static shock from carpet floors. That was peak arcade culture, and probably why your jacket always smelled like a roadside diner. You could not walk down a school hallway in the 1980s without seeing someone flipping through a pack of garbage pail kids. These were not just trading cards. They were grotesque masterpieces of booger-filled, vomit-splattered, toilet-themed chaos. And we loved them. Each card featured a horribly disfigured child doing something unspeakable. One might be vomiting rainbows, another exploding from zits, and a third eating glue with wild-eyed joy. These were the anti-Cabbage Patch Kids, disturbing, hilarious, and aggressively banned from classrooms. Parents hated them. Teachers hated them. But kids, we could not get enough. Lunchtime became black market exchanges of doubles, rares, and the coveted banned cards with names too offensive to say out loud. The detail on each one was disturbingly beautiful, and the puns were so bad they looped back around to genius. Eventually, schools started cracking down. Packs were confiscated, entire assemblies were held to tell kids not to bring them. Some towns even tried banning them from local stores, but banning only made them cooler. To this day, garbage pail kids live on in collector circles, but the originals are still the most offensive. Today, you can barely show a paper cut on television without a warning label. Back then, we proudly displayed a card of a baby eating its own diaper on our binder. Childhood innocence, 1980s style. Kids' joke books in the 1980s were like candy, brightly colored, cheaply made, and full of stuff that would get you canceled today. These things sat on every drugstore checkout rack, disguised as harmless fun. But crack one open, and you would find a minefield of racial stereotypes, sexist jokes, and lines so wildly inappropriate they would make your aunt clutch her pearls. Jokes about different nationalities, entire pages on dumb blondes, and even casual references to crimes, all packed between cartoons of grinning children. And yes, we memorized every line. You were the class clown if you could recite the latest zingers from Jokes for Jokers or Laugh Your Head Off. These books were meant to be silly, but they reflected just how tone-deaf humor could get when no one was paying attention. Eventually, the backlash came. Schools banned them, libraries quietly removed them, and publishers either went out of business or rebranded with safer content. Today's kids still get joke books, But they are about knock-knock jokes, animals doing yoga, or how to tell if your cat secretly runs your life. Say what you will, but the 1980s really took off-color humor and ran with it straight into detention. It is kind of amazing we turned out okay, although, let's be honest, that might still be up for debate. You might remember the ads. A random villain appears, maybe a swamp monster or a talking tornado. The hero shows up, Spider-Man, Batman, even Wonder Woman, and instead of fighting, they pull out a Hostess fruit pie. Cue the monster's sudden change of heart. These comic book ads were everywhere in the 1980s. Pages of your favorite superheroes solving every crisis with a snack cake. Hostess sales exploded. Parents didn't think twice until it started getting attention from health groups. Eventually, public pressure forced a wave of ad reform. Food companies could no longer use superheroes to promote unhealthy snacks. You can still find scans online, and they are just as ridiculous today as they were back then. You remember the ride. No seatbelts, zero padding, and the sharpest metal frames imaginable. These things were basically orange tin cans on wheels with bench seats that doubled as launch pads during a sharp turn. Add in the world's bumpiest suspension and kids roughhousing in the aisle, and it was like a carnival ride, without safety standards. One good pothole, and your forehead was kissing the emergency exit. Eventually, statistics caught up. Injuries, concussions, even fatalities all pointed toward one problem: those glorified church pews called bench seats. New safety standards were introduced, and manufacturers were told to build better buses with higher seatbacks, more cushioning, and yes, actual seatbelts. Today's buses still have problems, but they are miles ahead of the steel traps we used to ride in. We were not just going to school. We were dodging elbows, falling backpacks, and inertia itself. Once upon a time, science kits for kids came with enough material to actually cause an explosion. The 1980s chemistry set was not some watered-down safe science toy. Sulfur, potassium nitrate, hydrochloric acid, and real glass beakers, all packaged in colorful boxes that said ages 8 and up. You could mix stuff, melt stuff, and yes, blow stuff up. Instructions were vague. Some sets even encouraged experiments that created toxic fumes. Eventually, hospital visits and burned eyebrows piled up, and health regulators stepped in. New laws banned the sale of certain chemicals to minors, and toy companies were forced to remove the more exciting and dangerous elements. Today's chemistry kits are mostly baking soda volcanoes and color-changing milk. Those kits were terrifying, and also kind of awesome. Picture a living room with a popcorn ceiling, a lava lamp, and a tiny trampoline next to the sofa. Mini trampolines, also called rebounders, were sold as indoor fitness toys, and somehow parents thought this was a good idea. Kids would jump wildly, arms flailing, heads inches from the ceiling fan, while televisions balanced on wobbly stands nearby. No handlebar, no helmet, just pure chaos in every bounce. Face plants, busted lips, twisted ankles. Emergency rooms got real familiar with the phrase, "he just wanted to bounce a little." Fold it, move it, forget it's there, until someone trips and goes flying across the shag carpet. It took years of injuries and lawsuits before safety groups got involved. Padding was added, bars were installed, and eventually warnings plastered every box. Not for children under 14. But in the 1980s, they were a rite of passage. You have not known fear until you have trusted your life to a garden hose tied between two trees. Backyard ziplines in the 1980s were the definition of reckless fun. No one was ordering fancy equipment or installing tension brakes. The pulley was either a skate wheel or a stolen clothesline roller. It was peak backyard engineering. Tree trunks, fences, garbage cans. Everything was fair game at the bottom of the zipline. Eventually, neighborhood associations and safety groups stepped in. Zip lines became regulated. Kits were redesigned. Real anchors, braking systems, and helmets were suddenly required. It was dumb, it was dangerous, and it was unforgettable. Nothing says comfort like being told to hide under a desk from a nuclear bomb with cartoons. During the 1980s, Cold War paranoia was at an all-time high. and schools brought back duck and cover drills. But this time, they came with animated flair. Enter the Reagan-era safety films, short cartoons that showed smiling children hiding under desks while a mushroom cloud loomed in the background. The logic was shaky at best. If a nuke hits, crawl under a desk and cover your head. Sure, that will stop the atomic fireball. But the cartoons were designed to calm kids down. Characters with cheerful voices would say things like, "Do not panic, just get low and stay covered," as if a nuclear missile was no big deal. The whole thing was dark comedy in hindsight. Kids would watch these in the same classrooms where they learned multiplication. By the time the drills ended, half the class was shaking and the other half was asking if they could bring snacks under the desk. Eventually, mental health experts and educators called for a stop. The Cold War ended. The cartoons were shelved. And today, most people look back at them like relics from a dystopian sitcom. But if you remember sitting cross-legged on the carpet watching a cartoon teach you how to survive global annihilation, then you know just how wild the 1980s really were. If you opened a lunch tray in the 1980s, odds are the entree was just a formality. The real star? Dessert. We are talking pudding cups, sugar-glazed fruit pies, jelly rolls, and chocolate milk so sweet it could be mistaken for melted candy bars. Some schools even served actual cake with rainbow sprinkles, as a side. And let's not forget the rectangle pizza with a crust that doubled as a sponge. Somehow, that was still considered the healthy part. Lunchroom workers handed out Jell-O, fudge bars, and sometimes fruit cocktail drowned in syrup so thick it could power a car. The result? Kids were bouncing off walls by second period and crashing hard by gym class. No one blinked. It was totally normal to wash down your meatloaf with a honey bun. Eventually, nutritionists crashed the party. Studies linked childhood obesity to school lunches, and the food pyramid started making the rounds. Sugar got scaled back, dessert options became treat days, and chocolate milk was reduced to a sometimes thing. But if you grew up in the sugar-fueled cafeterias of the 1980s, you remember. You felt it. You lived the sugar crash. And somehow you still passed math. The 1980s mall was full of treasures, but the novelty shop? That was the Wild West of humor. Among the rubber chickens, whoopee cushions, and X-ray specs, you would find the infamous gag gifts, including the fat-shaming bathroom scale. This thing didn't tell your actual weight. Instead, it screamed things like, "One at a time, please," or "You broke me," when someone stepped on it. Meant to be funny, sure, but these jokes aged like milk in the sun. The problem? They were marketed for kids as prank items. You could buy one with your allowance. Never mind the fact that it drilled body image issues into people before they hit puberty. These scales were sold at checkout counters, birthday stores, and even carnivals. The laughs were cheap, but the damage wasn't. Fast forward a few decades and we have a way better understanding of how destructive fat shaming is, especially for kids. These gag gifts were slowly pulled from shelves, replaced by more thoughtful pranks that do not involve body insults. Today, they are relics of a time when funny meant mean. And honestly, no one's sad to see them go. Except maybe your cousin who still thinks dad jokes are edgy. Before energy drinks, before fancy lattes, there was Jolt Cola. It was unapologetically marketed as all the sugar and twice the caffeine. And it was for kids. You could walk into a convenience store at age 9, slap $2 on the counter, and walk out with a can of pure chaos. The ads promised alertness and rebellion. The label basically said, "Don't tell mom." This soda had enough caffeine to give a hummingbird anxiety. And yes, schools noticed. Teachers were dealing with classrooms full of wide-eyed, twitchy students who could not sit still for 10 seconds. Parents tried to get it banned, but that only made kids want it more. Eventually, pressure from health organizations did what concerned parents could not. Jolt Cola disappeared from most shelves. Other hyper-caffeinated drinks followed it out the door. Today, even adult energy drinks come with warning labels, and sodas have to play it safe. But if you drank Jolt as a kid in the 1980s, you remember that electric jolt to your system. It was less a drink, more a personality shift. 1 second, you are fine. Next thing you know, You are organizing a Lego heist in the garage. The action figures of the 1980s were not just for collecting, they were for battle. And when it came to WWF wrestling toys, they meant business. These things were solid plastic bricks with arms molded into permanent attack poses. Some even had a built-in eye-gouging grip. No, really. You could position the arms to hook into another figure's eye sockets. It was intense. As kids, we did not think twice. That move came straight from Saturday morning matches, where Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior body slammed their way into our living rooms. But eventually, people started asking questions. Why were we teaching kids to jam their toys into each other's faces like Mortal Kombat in miniature form? Add in the fact that kids were copying these moves on their siblings, and you had a recipe for ER visits. The figures were banned in some schools, restricted from toy shelves, and redesigned with less violent features. These days, wrestling toys are safer, softer, and far less gougy. But the originals? They were tiny weapons in disguise. Nostalgic? Sure. Appropriate? Probably not. But if you survived a living room Royal Rumble with these guys, you earned that nostalgia the hard way. Before screenshots, before scanners, before save as, we had silly Putty. Not just a toy, a tool. In the 1980s, one of its coolest tricks was pressing it onto newspaper comic strips. You would flatten the Putty, smush it onto a Garfield or Calvin and Hobbes panel, peel it back, and voila, instant copy. You felt like a magician. But here's the kicker, it actually worked. The ink transferred like magic, which also meant kids started copying other sections of the newspaper. Not just comics. We are talking entire headlines, weird ads, even the occasional police blotter. Schools got wise. Teachers started banning silly Putty from classrooms after kids began bringing in strips of breaking news copied in goo form. Some newspapers were not thrilled either, claiming copyright infringement because, yes, even goopy impressions were technically reproductions. Eventually, printers changed the way ink bonded to paper, making this trick way harder to pull off. Silly Putty stayed on shelves, but its newspaper copying days quietly faded into history. Still, if you remember flattening that pink glob onto the Sunday Funnies, you know it was more than just a toy. It was a time machine, a stretchy, squishy time machine. A computer dating service. Existed using punch cards and the U.S. mail. In 1970, you could get a date from a mainframe. Back before apps and swiping, dating involved paper, postage, and a whole lot of hope. In the 1970s, computer dating sounded like science fiction, but it was real and wildly popular. You started by answering a long questionnaire about your hobbies, values, likes, and dislikes. Then those answers were transferred onto punch cards and fed into a mainframe the size of your garage. A week or two later, the results would show up in your mailbox. Not a profile picture, not a bio, just names and a few facts. Sometimes a phone number. You were expected to call or write, a total stranger, and maybe meet for coffee. It was slow, it was awkward, and it worked more often than you'd think. People fell in love this way. Some even got married. Others got a pen pal and a story to tell for life. You trusted a machine to find your soulmate. And in some cases, it actually did. The system was clunky, but it made people feel seen. Each name that arrived felt like a possibility. You were not just filling out a survey, you were filling in the blanks of your future. Today, dating happens in seconds. But in the 1970s, it took patience, postage stamps, and a little faith in the power of technology. Television antenna adjustments were part of the evening routine, just like brushing your teeth or fighting over the remote. Before streaming, before digital signals, there were rabbit ears, two shiny rods that stood on top of the television like alien feelers. Getting a clear picture meant twisting them in random directions, adjusting one while the other stayed stubbornly out of reach. Sometimes you needed to stand on one foot. Sometimes the only way to get the signal was to hold the antenna yourself and stay there, frozen, arm extended, human satellite. Someone from the couch would yell, "Right there, do not move," and you would stay stuck in position, sacrificing comfort for clarity. Foil was added for better reception. Coat hangers became tools of innovation. And if the weather was bad, good luck. The static would return like an uninvited guest. It was frustrating, yes, but it was also communal. Families worked together to solve the mystery of the fuzzy screen. You cheered when the picture came in. You groaned when it disappeared mid-show. Antenna adjustments were the dance of analog television. Awkward, unpredictable, and always a little magical when they actually worked. Before Bluetooth speakers and smart home assistants, there was the built-in wall radio. Usually installed near the phone nook or tucked into a panel above the kitchen counter, this was your portal to the world. With one turn of a giant knob, you could get the weather, farm reports, school closings, or your favorite midday jazz station. Some had small intercom buttons for calling upstairs or out to the garage. It was kitchen multitasking before anyone used the word. Moms would hum along while stirring soup or call the kids for dinner through the built-in speaker. You knew what time it was by the voice on the radio, not your phone. It was the soundtrack of daily life, soft static, local news, and old familiar jingles. Even the quiet moments felt fuller with it playing in the background. But as media moved to TV, then to handheld devices, these built-ins became obsolete. Wires were cut, faces painted over. Now, if you find one in an old house, it looks like a forgotten control panel from a spaceship. Once, it brought life into the kitchen. Now, it is just a silent square on the wall. We carry entire sound systems in our pockets today, but they do not echo down the hallway the same way. What did we lose when the kitchen stopped singing? Before Nintendo, video games were gasping for breath. After Nintendo, they were alive again. It was 1985 when the Nintendo Entertainment System hit American shelves and changed living rooms forever. The gray and red console was a Trojan horse, simple in design but hiding worlds inside. Suddenly, you were not just a kid. You were Mario, leaping through pipes to save the princess. You were Link, braving dungeons for the Triforce. You were part of something massive. Nintendo did not just bring games. It brought heroes. It brought soundtracks you could hum in your sleep and cheat codes whispered like secret spells. The controller became an extension of your hand. Blowing into cartridges felt like a ritual, and beating a level felt like beating life itself. For many, Nintendo was not a toy. It was a friend, a daily escape, a safe place to fail and try again. Families gathered around the screen, arguing over whose turn it was. Siblings became rivals, parents got curious, and the living room was never the same again. With every beep and pixel, Nintendo gave us wonder, and it never asked for anything more than time and imagination. Nothing said fancy night like a foil tray full of mystery food. TV dinners were the ultimate poor kid luxury. You got a tray, compartments, and maybe even a tiny brownie in the corner. But heating them was a gamble. The mashed potatoes boiled over while the meatloaf stayed frozen in the center. You had to guess which corner to poke holes in or risk a microwave explosion. And once the edges of the tray started to curl, you knew it was done enough. No matter how uneven it cooked, you still ate every single bite, even the rubbery peas. That little brownie? Always undercooked, but somehow the best part. You followed the instructions, but still ended up with molten potatoes and frozen meat. You stabbed the plastic with a fork like it owed you money. And every corner of that tray had a different temperature zone. Sometimes the peas were ice cubes. Sometimes the meat turned into charcoal, but you ate it anyway, blowing on one bite and chipping your tooth on the next. There was always gravy. Always. It covered everything like a bad decision you could not take back. But the novelty? Unmatched. Sitting in front of the television with your own tray, pretending to be in a commercial, it was priceless. Even if it burned your tongue and your trust. You could smoke in the mall, the plane, and the doctor's office, all on the same day. Ashtrays were built into everything, even shopping carts. If you wanted to light up in the 1970s, no one stopped you. Not in the mall, not on a plane, not even in the doctor's waiting room. Smoking was everywhere, and everyone just accepted it. Ashtrays were built into shopping carts at the grocery store. Planes had designated smoking sections. which meant you sat 2 rows away from a guy puffing a Marlboro and hoped the air vent would do its job. Hospitals had smoking lounges. Restaurants asked, "Smoking or non?" But the air always smelled the same. Even cars had ashtrays in every door and a lighter built into the dashboard. Doctors smoked, teachers smoked. Your parents probably did too. It was just part of life. Until it wasn't. Over time, the warnings grew louder and the pushback began. But for a while, the whole country ran on coffee, polyester, and cigarettes. You look back now and wonder how we all survived with lungs intact. But back then, it was normal. So normal that people lit up while walking the mall, while getting dental work, even while picking out diapers for their kid. And nobody blinked. Neon everything was not a trend. It was a takeover. Shirts, socks, shoelaces, scrunchies. If it could be worn, it could be neon. Bright pinks, electric greens, yellows so vivid they could stop traffic. Walk into a classroom in the 1980s, and you might see a dozen students glowing like highlighters. It was not subtle, it was not sophisticated, but it was unforgettable. Neon made sure you were seen from across the street, or the roller rink. Entire outfits were built around one blinding shade. And the braver kids, they mixed them. A neon blue shirt with neon orange shorts and lime green shoelaces. Why not? Matching was optional. Visibility was everything. Neon told the world you were loud, proud, and unbothered by what anyone else thought. It showed up in birthday parties, aerobics tapes, and mall photo booths. Looking back now, it seems like a color explosion. But that was the magic. Neon was confidence in color form. It was youth, amplified. It was chaos, celebrated. And for those who wore it without a hint of irony, it was the brightest part of a decade that refused to dim. Tile countertops used to be the envy of every stylish post-war kitchen. Bright turquoise, sunny yellow, or soft pink ceramic tiles lined the counters like a checkerboard of domestic optimism. But the secret every home cook knew was this: those grout lines were a menace. They absorbed spills, caught crumbs, and stained faster than you could scrub. You might as well have been cooking on a tiled floor. Still, people loved the look. It felt cheerful, polished, and clean, at least at first glance. The tiles were cool to the touch and easy to replace if one chipped. You wiped them down after every meal, but somehow they still told the story of every spill and every stir. Those stains were not just grime, they were memories set in stone. But no matter how often you scrubbed with baking soda and vinegar, the grout lines always seemed a shade darker than the day before. Eventually, the shine wore off. Laminate, granite, and seamless solid surfaces took over. You could wipe once and be done. No more grout brushes, no more bleach, but something about those tile counters still lingers in the memory. They were imperfect, yes, but also warm and lived in. Kitchens where birthday cakes were frosted and Sunday gravy simmered for hours. When did spotless surfaces become more important than stories? If the 1980s had a soundtrack, it blared from a boombox. Big, bulky, and proud, the boombox was more than just a stereo. It was a statement. You carried it on your shoulder not because it was easy, but because it was loud. It was rebellion with a battery pack. Hip-hop rose from sidewalks and city blocks, and the boombox was its pulpit. Breakdancers made cardboard stages. Crowds formed like rituals. The music roared, and the city danced. These machines brought bass into backyards, rhythm into corners, and unity into chaos. Whether it was Grandmaster Flash or Run DMC, whether it was Michael Jackson or Madonna, the boombox did not care. It amplified whoever held the power cord. You controlled the vibe. And that mattered. It mattered so much. Because in an era without streaming, without smartphones, without wireless speakers, the boombox gave you freedom. The louder you played, the louder you were. It was not just about music, it was about identity, expression, and claiming your own tiny stage wherever you stood. You did not need a toy chest when you had a couch. Just rip the cushions off, throw a blanket over the top, and boom, you were in a castle, spaceship, or post-apocalyptic bunker. Couch forts were indoor magic, created out of boredom and budget. Some forts even had rooms, one for snacks, one for sleeping, and one that was always just someone hiding with a flashlight. The more pillows you stole from around the house, the stronger the walls. Someone always crawled in and kicked the roof down, and someone always cried, but it got rebuilt, stronger every time. You decorated with couch throws and whatever stuffed animals were lying around. If you had a working flashlight and a peanut butter sandwich, it might as well have been a mansion. The cushions smelled like feet and popcorn. You used old towels for a roof and held them down with soup cans. And heaven help you if your dad came home and wanted to sit down. Your fort had no rules. The floor was lava. The doorway was a blanket flap. You brought snacks inside and called it a kitchen. You hid there during arguments. You camped there during cartoons. That little cave of fabric and stuffing was your escape. You had no Legos, no Nintendo, no dollhouse. But you had imagination. And a lumpy couch from the 1970s. And honestly, what else did you need? The Smiley Face was copyrighted and the creator made almost no money. It became a global icon, but he sold the design for $45. You know that bright yellow smiley face, the one with the simple black eyes and curved mouth? You have seen it on shirts, buttons, mugs, and emojis. But it started as a quick sketch by Harvey Ball, a graphic designer from Massachusetts. In 1963, he was hired by an insurance company to create a symbol to boost morale. He spent about 10 minutes on the design. He was paid $45. No royalties, no rights, nothing. The smiley face exploded in popularity almost immediately. Companies printed it on everything they could slap a circle onto. It showed up on cereal boxes, underwear, roller skates, and wall clocks. It became the logo for feelings, even if the guy who drew it never got a second paycheck. Ball just watched the world grin and said, well, at least it worked. He never sued, never complained, and even founded World Smile Day later on. It showed up on posters, stickers, even school supplies. Companies began using it to sell everything from jeans to cereal. By the time it went global, the original artist had long been forgotten. And his $45, that was it. Meanwhile, others made millions licensing the image. Ball never complained. He said he was just happy people smiled more. And honestly, that might be the most wholesome ending to a capitalist tragedy ever. Mixtapes were handwritten love letters wrapped in cassette cases. You waited by the radio for hours just to hit record at the perfect moment, trying to catch the start of your favorite song without the DJ talking over it. You rewound, replayed, and carefully curated the perfect order so each track melted into the next. Some were made for crushes, others for best friends. Some were sorry tapes, and some were just because. Each one had a theme, a purpose, and a heart behind it. You picked songs that said what you could not. Then you labeled the tape in your best handwriting, maybe decorated the case, and handed it over like it was treasure. Because it was. A great mixtape took hours, sometimes days, to get just right. And when someone gave you one, you listened to it until the tape wore thin and the sound warped. Mixtapes were not just music. They were memories, feelings, time capsules wrapped in magnetic ribbon. And long after the songs faded, you remembered the person who made it, their handwriting, their choices, their message. Even now, in a world of playlists, nothing hits quite like the soft click of a tape deck and a song you once recorded just for someone else. Behind the smooth cabinet doors of many mid-century kitchens hid a surprising tool, a pull-out dish drainer that lived inside the wall. After washing dishes, you would slide out the rack, load it up, and let everything drip dry behind closed doors. It kept counters clear, made the kitchen look tidy, and gave a sense of order that matched the rest of the house. Some even had small trays underneath to catch the water. It was not about hiding the mess. It was about making space feel peaceful. When plastic racks and countertop drainers became standard, these hidden drying systems quietly disappeared. New kitchens no longer had room for them, and they were hard to clean and prone to mold. But there was something thoughtful about them, something neat, something kind of charming. Now, we just pile dishes in the sink or leave them out for hours. The idea of drying dishes out of sight feels like something from a different era. One where appearances mattered, but so did small comforts. What else have we stopped tucking away for the sake of convenience? There were bands, and then there were hair metal bands. They did not just play music, they exploded onto the stage. Bon Jovi, Mötley Crüe, Poison, these were not just names. They were icons with teased hair, eyeliner, and leather pants so tight they could probably break glass. The 80s were loud, flashy, and unapologetic, and hair metal was the soundtrack. These bands brought arena anthems and pyrotechnics and turned concerts into full-blown rock operas. They made being over-the-top a lifestyle. Power ballads met guitar solos that could melt your face off. It was glam, grit, and glory all rolled into a headbang, and they owned it. From the moment they strutted on stage, they dripped charisma and chaos. Music videos looked like wild fever dreams, smoke machines, motorcycles, women in fringe, and men who looked like peacocks in heat. And we loved it. Teens blasted them in bedrooms. Posters covered every inch of the wall. Even parents, reluctantly or not, knew the lyrics. These bands made rebellion look like theater. And for a generation that craved identity, they gave us swagger, eyeliner, and the kind of sound you could feel in your bones. Hair metal was not subtle, but neither was the 80s. Forget rabbit ears, you had coat hangers. Reception in the 1980s was not about technology. It was about physics, patience, and standing on one foot while holding a wire hanger at a 17-degree angle near the television. You would twist it, bend it, jam it into the back of the TV, and suddenly, perfect picture. Until you moved. Then it was back to static and blurry game shows. Someone in the family always claimed to be the antenna whisperer. That meant you held the hanger while everyone else watched. If you let go, the screen fuzzed over, and you became the villain of the household. Some hangers were wrapped in foil like space-age art projects. Others had split ends from being fine-tuned with pliers. You tried balancing it on books, soda cans, even your little brother's head, anything to avoid touching it yourself. Every channel had its own sweet spot, and finding it was like unlocking a combination lock you did not know you had. Your only reward? Maybe catching half an episode of Knight Rider before someone walked in front of the screen and ruined everything. Today, people complain if their Wi-Fi dips for 2 seconds, but back then, we fought gravity and metal to watch cartoons. And honestly, that fuzzy half-clear picture, it still felt like magic. Roller disco. Had its own TV show and professional leagues. Think roller derby meets solid gold. Roller disco was not just skating, it was a whole lifestyle. Neon lights, mirrored balls, funk music, and glitter on every surface. In the 1970s, roller rinks became temples of movement and style, and it all made its way to television. Roller games, mixed roller derby, disco dancing, and over-the-top characters. Think tight uniforms, choreographed rivalries, and announcers who treated every spin like a Super Bowl moment. Skaters had stage names, kids had posters of their favorite teams. There were national tournaments, sponsorships, and dramatic storylines played out on skates. It was part athleticism, part theater, all 70s spectacle. And it worked, until it didn't. Like disco itself, the craze eventually burned out. But for one glittering moment, roller skates were the coolest shoes on the planet. Acid wash jeans were loud before you even opened your mouth. With their blotchy patterns and faded splotches, they looked like someone had taken a bleach bottle to denim, and somehow, that became cool. These jeans were rebellious, messy, and unmistakably 1980s. Everyone had a pair. Some wore them tight-rolled at the ankle, others let them drape over high-top sneakers. Acid wash showed up in jackets, skirts, and full matching sets that turned entire outfits into walking eye strain. You could not blend in wearing acid wash. You stood out, and that was the point. It was denim with attitude. Rough, bold, a little chaotic. Parents hated it. Teachers rolled their eyes. But teens embraced the weirdness. It felt edgy, like you were wearing the uniform of a generation that refused to dress quietly. Old photographs now show groups of kids lined up in front of lockers, each one looking like they had just emerged from a bleach accident and loving it. Acid wash was not timeless, it was not flattering, but it was unforgettable. And in a decade known for excess, it fit right in. Even now, pulling on an old pair brings back the noise, the neon, and the thrill of breaking the fashion rules. Imagine opening your cabinet to plan dinner and seeing a chalkboard right on the inside of the door. Some even had pull-down recipe scrolls made of parchment or linen, mounted like an old-fashioned map. You could write a grocery list, the day's menu, or a reminder that your mother-in-law was coming over. These weren't just novelty features, they were part of how a kitchen thought out loud. In a time before smartphones or sticky notes, these were the planners, the notepads, the command centers of the kitchen, and they told a story. In chalk dust and grease smudges, you could see a family's week unfold. Sometimes the writing faded, but the memory of it never did. It was handwriting that knew your routines better than you did. Eventually, they faded out. Whiteboards came in, then apps, then voice memos. Cupboards no longer had messages waiting. Now, kitchens are silent and glossy, all smooth wood and cold steel. No one scribbles meatloaf tonight inside a drawer anymore. The charm is gone, and so is the handwriting. But in old kitchens, those chalk smears still whisper what once was. When did we stop writing things down where it mattered most? Diet Coke did not just arrive, it announced itself. It was 1982, and suddenly there it was, sleek, silver, and somehow cooler than everything else in your fridge. This was not just soda. It was soda with an attitude. People were becoming health conscious, and Coca-Cola knew it. They gave the world an alternative, and we grabbed it with both hands. The can itself looked futuristic. The taste was crisp, sharp, slightly rebellious. You could have your cake and drink it too. Diet Coke became the drink of choice for the fashion-forward, the calorie-conscious, and anyone trying to look good in a shoulder-padded suit. It was everywhere, at malls, in offices, on TV sets next to glowing VCRs. Celebrities held it like an accessory. Models posed with it like it was perfume. It was light. It was fizzy. And it meant something. It meant you were modern. It meant you cared about your image. It meant you could still enjoy life without the guilt. It was not just a beverage. It was a movement, a cool, carbonated promise that you could be smarter, sleeker, and savvier than the people drinking the red can. And in the 80s, that mattered. A lot. If you could bend your arms, you were not wearing enough. Winter fashion in a broke household meant wearing all your clothes at the same time. No snow boots? Put on 2 pairs of socks and wrap your feet in plastic bags. No thermal coat? Layer every shirt you own until you become a walking laundry basket. By the time you left the house, you looked like a burrito stuffed with denim, polyester, and regret. It took 15 minutes just to get through the front door. Gloves were mismatched, scarves were hand-knitted and itchy, and hats were usually someone else's. You layered underwear, 2 pairs of jeans, a flannel, 2 sweaters, and your good jacket, if you even had one. You did not walk, you waddled. Going to the bathroom was a full production. If you fell down in the snow, good luck getting back up. But you stayed warm, sort of. If the wind got through all those layers, you just cursed and pulled your sleeves down even farther. Fashion did not matter. Movement did not matter. Survival did. And if you forgot one layer, you would not forget again. These days, people wear heated jackets. Back then, we wore every jacket. A game called Barrel of Monkeys was based on a real chemistry tool. The hook design was inspired by molecular modeling equipment. It started with red plastic monkeys and a simple idea. Hook one, then another, and try to make a chain without dropping any. The game looked easy. It was not. You would dump them out, scramble to pick up the first one, and hope your hands were steady enough to keep the chain growing. But what most people do not know is this. Those monkey arms, they were not random. They were modeled after molecular hooks used by chemists to build atom models in labs. A toy maker saw the design and said, "This could be a game." And just like that, Barrel of Monkeys was born. Kids everywhere suddenly cared about balance, strategy, and monkey geometry. It was frustrating and addictive. Just one more monkey, you swore. And then the whole thing collapsed. You started again, determined. Because getting more than 10 monkeys in a chain felt like beating the world. The record? Probably somewhere around 28. But most kids never got close. Still, for a few minutes, you were not just playing, you were mastering monkey physics. Cabbage Patch Kid frenzy turned toy stores into battlegrounds. These soft-bodied dolls with unique, slightly odd faces were the must-have gift of the 1980s. Each one came with a birth certificate and adoption papers, making it feel like you were bringing home a real baby. But getting your hands on one? That was another story. Parents lined up at dawn. Some camped overnight. Others sprinted through department stores in scenes more suited to action movies than holiday shopping. There were arguments, tears, the occasional tackle, and when someone finally scored a doll, they clutched it like it was made of gold. Kids loved them. They named them, dressed them, and carried them everywhere. Some families had to settle for knockoffs with names like Garden Patch Pals that never quite felt the same. But if you had a real one, you were a legend. Looking back, it seems wild that a doll caused so much chaos. But in that moment, nothing mattered more. Cabbage Patch Kids were not just toys. They were trophies. Proof that your parents had braved the crowds and won. And decades later, those round faces still sit on shelves, quietly remembering the madness they caused. If any of these banned 1980s relics made you laugh, cringe, or scream, "I had that," drop your wildest memory in the comments. Smash that like button like it's a slap bracelet, and hit subscribe so you never miss a trip back to the weirdest decade ever.